Contented Media presents Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, an original podcast series with Mark Hunter and Arthur Van Pelt.
Hello and welcome to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, the podcast that searches through the dirty washing that is the month's Craig Wright and BSV news, looking for anything clean enough to wear and present to you, our faithful listeners. My name is Mark Hunter, writer, professional zeitgeist setter and former Miss Universe semi-finalist, and with me is the man who actually won that year's contest, Arthur Van Pelt. Arthur, how's life?
Yeah, great, Mark. Thanks.
Are your kids off for summer holidays yet?
No, not this year, to be honest. We stay at home. We've been to Greece just before this holiday already, and another child's holiday. So this year we stay at home.
Nice. Well, yeah, mine broke up on Friday, so they're currently running rampant in the house. So I'm just hiding in my office as much as possible to get away from the noise.
Yeah.
Well, let's crack on, shall we?
Yes, sir.
We start this month with something that actually happened at the very end of June, which was a legal notice by Craig Wright's counsel on TA and published in the Financial Times. The notice represents the next step in Wright's attempts to obtain the BSV tokens held in two addresses that were supposedly lost in the Pineapple hack in February 2020 and totaling some 110,000 coins. To recap, Wright's employer nChain created a notary tool for recovering lost or stolen coins, which the Bitcoin Association, which we call the BSV Association because that's what it represents, last month agreed to implement on the BSV blockchain. This was done in order to allow Tulip Trading Limited, a company owned by Wright and which was the alleged victim of the Pineapple hack, to recover the supposedly stolen coins following a phony settlement last month. For more on this, see our June update. Following the news that the BSV Association had settled, which laid down a red carpet for Wright to begin his claim to access the 110,000 BSV coins he says were stolen, it was only a matter of time until Wright began this process, and this legal notice is the first stage. As a reminder, the reason why Wright has to use this circuitous route is because in March, a judge blocked his attempt to gain access to these coins through a court order, putting an end to his 3-year campaign to access the coins, plus the 110,000 Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Cash ABC coins that were also lost in the Pineapple hack. These coins have never left the addresses in question and are in fact attributed to a March 2011 hack of the exchange Mt. Gox. More of this later. Back to the legal notice, which was laid out in 4 sections. The first saw Tulip Trading Limited, TTL, claim ownership of the 2 wallets Wright says were stolen from him. The second explained how TTL lost access to the coins. The third explained how anyone with a prior claim over the wallets should proceed. And the fourth explained what would happen if no one came forward. Arthur, let's look at these sections one by one. First, the wallets themselves. The notice said that TTL is the owner of 2 addresses containing, as well as the 110,000 BSV, the same amount of what it says are tokens from the so-called Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Cash ABC projects. A note to TTL here. Trying to disparage something by calling it so-called only works if there's a big enough groundswell of opinion against the use of that name. However, only a tiny minority of people call BTC Bitcoin Core, and the names Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Cash ABC, or eCash as it is now, actually are their names, so the use of so-called doesn't apply here and just makes you look petty. TTL then listed the 2 addresses at the heart of the legal fight, one of which we know as the OneFeeks address. Arthur, TTL claims that the Bitcoin Cash version of the address has a lowercase f at the end of it, and the Bitcoin address has a capital F, but doesn't this make it an entirely different address?
Yeah, it does. It is even an address that does not even exist.
So how does an error like that make it into what they consider to be a legal notice?
Yeah, those little, and actually, this is of course a big, major mistake. I call that the Craig touch. Craig made that mistake, and he sent this information to his counsel Ontier, and Ontier didn't bother to do some due diligence as always. And yeah, they take it for granted that it should be like this. That's how I think it happened.
Those who know a bit about Bitcoin's history know that the OneFeeks address is inextricably linked to Mt. Gox, an exchange that saw Bitcoin siphoned off undetected for years until it finally collapsed in February 2014 when it realised its vaults were emptier than a Craig Wright promise. Arthur, what is the relevance of the OneFeeks wallet in that Mt. Gox hack?
Well, what happened is that around the date of the 1st of March 2011, Mark Karpelus was the buyer of the Mt. Gox exchange from Jed McCaleb. And they were in the process of a bit of rebuilding the exchange so Mark Karpelus could take it over. But during that transition, a hack happened. They put all the software on a server. They were both remotely working on that server, but a hacker found access to that exact server and managed to empty some addresses belonging to Mt. Gox. And those coins were transferred to the OneFeeks address, and presumably that was an address controlled by the hacker, and it all happened on the 1st of March.
Wright's version of events is different, however. In June 2020, he released a statement through CoinGeek in which he said, "I agreed to purchase the Bitcoin in the OneFeeks address in late February 2011, and it was transferred into that address on 1st of March that year. The only evidence of the allegation regarding the origin of OneFeeks Bitcoin of which I am aware is a purported Skype chat between Mark Karpelus and Jed McCaleb, but that document is only a text file rather than a validated Skype log. No other evidence or any credible evidence, such as internal or accounting records from Mt. Gox, has been put forward." Wright also added that, as far as he was aware, no one representing Mt. Gox had ever come forward with a claim over its ownership of the coins in the OneFeeks address, despite it being known that TTL had claimed ownership of it since February 2018. Arthur, this is wrong because there have been prior claims on the OneFeeks address, haven't there?
Yeah, for sure. We know of a guy called Danny Brewster, who was in that era a user, and he had an account on Mt. Gox. And he claims that when Mt. Gox collapsed in 2014, he was still owner of Bitcoin. And if you look backward, then those OneFeeks coins could be related to him. So indirectly, he says, I am owner of those Bitcoin because they belong to Mt. Gox. The trustee should obtain access, or at least try to obtain access to that address. And then the creditors of Mt. Gox should be paid from those 80,000 Bitcoin on that address. So yeah, sort of on behalf of the creditors of Mt. Gox, he laid claim.
If Wright wasn't aware before that he had competition for the OneFeeks wallet, he is now. Karpelus tweeted that he had forwarded the TTL legal notice onto the Mt. Gox bankruptcy administrator to see if a legal challenge can be mounted. On to the second point, which is the way in which TTL says the coins were lost. TTL says this happened when the private keys that are required to control and spend the digital assets being unlawfully accessed and deleted by persons unknown in a hack of computer systems belonging to TTL's CEO Dr. Craig Wright, which took place between 5th and 8th of February 2020. Now, we've trod and retrod over this particular aspect of the Craig Wright story a few times throughout various episodes of this podcast, so we won't go through another explanation here. If you don't know the story, then it's worth checking out Series 1, Episode 5 to fully understand the wet sand castle that is Craig Wright's hacking claim. Now, we'd love to be able to give you an update on this case, to say that the hacking gang has been arrested and no longer presents a threat to the wealthy citizens of Surrey, but the truth is that there has been no public movement on the case since it was filed more than 2 years ago, during which time still nothing has moved out of the wallets in question. It's about as close as you can get to wasting police time without actually being done for it. On to the third and fourth points, which relates to how parties with a prior claim on the wallets in question can go about making their claim. Now, Arthur, I assume because TTL didn't get a court order allowing them access to the coins, that no one else requires a court order or anything legal to file their own claim either.
Yeah, the funny thing is that what Ontier wants is that people who are having a competing claim, they have to issue proceedings in the courts of England and Wales, and that means they have to file a lawsuit against Craig Wright. But you can already guess what that is about. They want to create an extra barrier that is costly and time consuming, so the less competing claims they probably will get.
I mean, it actually sums up the way that Craig Wright goes about business, because he tried to get a court order, he failed, but he's demanding other people get legal proof to try and claim the coins that he has not got legal proof he owns. It's so backwards, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Point 4 explains that anyone who doesn't make a claim within 3 months forfeits their right to make such a claim, at which point TTL will apparently pursue its bid to reclaim the coins, and anyone coming late to the party will not be allowed in. This amazing suggestion was neatly summarised by Kim Nilsson of WizSec, who tweeted that, "I may not be a lawyer, but unless you open your wallet and do exactly as I say, your property is mine, is not a thing in law." Indeed, this 3-month deadline imposed by TTL is completely arbitrary and bears no resemblance to law whatsoever. If anyone at any time can satisfy a court that they have more right to the coins than TTL, then they will be legally entitled to them, regardless of whether 3 months or 3 decades has passed. This is known as a court order, something that Craig Wright is more than familiar with. Arthur, I love this idea of somebody else obtaining a court order and forcing N-Chain, TTL, BSV Association, whoever, to give them the coins back through their own process. It would just be fantastic.
That would absolutely be beautiful poetry, yeah. For example, let's presume that in 2025 the Mt. Gox trustee decides to chase those BSV tokens on the OneFix address, only for BSV in this case, knowing that they are readily available for confiscation after Craig Wright obtained them. Then the Mt. Gox trustee can easily make the case that these tokens belong to Mt. Gox and obtain a court order ordering such, and then Craig Wright will lose the coins again. What's the use?
Let's move on to what happens after the arbitrary 3-month deadline passes, assuming that no one has lodged a competing claim. It's pretty clear that TTL will use this as evidence of its ownership of the coins, but what else will be in their evidence package? Let's take a sneak peek. First, we have the purchase order for the 2011 buying of the wallet and its contents, which was typed up by Wright's ex-wife Lynn and contains, as CoinGeek itself says, some inaccuracies, as well as ignoring the fact that WMIRK only added Bitcoin to its list of serviced assets in 2013. This record is supposedly definitive proof that TTL owns those wallets, and although the evidence has yet to be examined in court, here's what the judge who dismissed the Pineapple Hack case had to say about it. Its claim to ownership is supported by Dr. Wright's witness evidence, but documentary support is limited. What documentary evidence there is also does not demonstrate that TTL, as opposed to any other entity under Dr. Wright's control or that of his family, owns the assets. The judge went on to say that there is some evidence of the purchase of Bitcoin at the OneFix address in February 2011 in the form of a contemporaneous purchase order prepared by Dr. Wright's then wife, Lynn Wright, but that there were some issues with the content of that document. He adds, however, that the metadata, which was analysed by a firm hired by Craig Wright, was not one of these issues. The same judge noted when looking at the evidence backing up the purchase of the coins that, as with the purchase order, there are some issues with the content of the records, but they appear to show that entities related to Dr. Wright recorded assets held at the 2 addresses from 2011 and at least 2014, respectively. However, the available financial statements for TTL for the period between incorporation and May 2017 appear to show no ownership of digital or other assets. Regardless of these doubts, the judge did in fact rule that the evidence supporting the wallet ownership was strong enough for the claim to be more than fanciful and warranted examination in court, although again referenced the material deficiencies in the evidence. Next, we have the police report from the pineapple hack, which is supposed to act as evidence of theft. As we've already covered in this series, however, the police investigation has not led anywhere, at least publicly, with neither the police nor Wright asking for assistance from the public in tracking down the hackers, and no one ever identified in the hack, let alone arrested. This was also alluded to by the judge in the pineapple hack case, who stated that there is no indication that material progress has been made towards identifying the perpetrators. Arthur, Wright has spoken in the past how he doesn't seem bothered by the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, if I lose a tenner, if I lose £10, I feel it for a good day or two. He's saying he's lost access to $23 billion, and yet he doesn't seem bothered. That's either someone who has got the most detached mentality possible, or it's a complete lie. There's no middle ground, is there?
It only reminds me of his "I have more money than your country," and he cannot even prove it, that he has it. But he can afford this attitude because he is being sponsored by Calvin Ayre, who is pumping millions in him. So as long as that money stream is continuing, he can afford those silly statements.
Next, we come to the issue of competing claims. Of course, there's a very good reason why TTL made the barrier to lodging a competing claim ludicrously high, and assuming that no one meets these demands, it will use this as evidence that it alone is the single legitimate holder. This, naturally, is a completely illogical stance to take, but let's not forget that TTL has to win over a person or group of people who actively want it to succeed, so there's not much chance of failure here. They could probably present a mouldy lemon and it would be accepted as proof. Wright himself commented on the notice this month, explaining on LinkedIn how the notary tool will apply to BTC, BCH and Bitcoin BSV. Ethereum and others will be required to implement this by law. Once people see that an asset on a blockchain can easily be recovered over a certain amount, the entire industry shifts. Any blockchain not doing this in 2 years from now will be a criminal system that is seized. No exchanges will exist, and no asset will be traded that cannot be recovered. Arthur, this is all well and good, but Wright has previous when it comes to not delivering on self-imposed deadlines, doesn't he?
At the moment, I'm writing actually an article about all those failed promises, and I try to gather as much information about those failed promises as possible. But what comes to mind immediately are the rolling iceberg orders, the mining death spiral, the SegWit floor reveals. BSV would go to $1,200. And BTC at the same time to 10 cents, and all those type of crazy things, and never ever came from it.
It's also worth considering what Wright is saying about the role of the developers here. Wright's argument is that a court can force them to implement a software patch, like the notary tool, and that any blockchains that don't implement it will be illegal in 2 years' time. How likely is this to happen? Let's ask the judge in the pineapple hack case again. The undertaking to act or assumption of responsibility on which TTL has to rely is the defendant's alleged control of the networks and their alleged ability to make a change to the software, irrespective of whether they are actually engaged in making changes and in the absence of any more general contractual or other obligation to make changes in the future. But developers are a fluctuating body of individuals. As a general proposition, it cannot realistically be argued that they owe continuing obligations to, for example, remain as developers and make future updates whenever it might be in the interests of owners to do so. And in case that was too confusing, here's a summary. The fact that the BSV network may be preparing to make a system change to accommodate loss of access to private keys does not mean that any such change, whether a general one or specific to TTL, can be imposed on others. Arthur, this is quite important. How does this ruling affect Craig Wright's efforts?
Nou ja, substantially, of course. First, it shows to me at least, and everybody else, that Craig Wright has no any sense. He has no knowledge how Bitcoin actually works. It only can happen on a very centralized blockchain like BSV that such a thing will be implemented and used. But the real Bitcoin, which we all know as BTC, it can never happen like this. I mean, look how that goes. When a debate is started for the change on Bitcoin, this proposal will be entered in on GitHub, and then a new debate will start. Will we ever submit this? We should first code it properly, and the code should be checked and tested again, and recoded, and then finally it will be submitted and offered to the nodes and the miners for signaling. That means that they can tell the system and make known in the Bitcoin system if they are going to implement it in future. And it's called signaling. And if nobody is ever signaling or voting for that type of change, then that change will never happen, and then it will quickly disappear from the list and never come back. And I can tell you already that everybody who can vote with their nodes, the full nodes and the mining nodes, that is how it works with Bitcoin, and there are 10,000s of them. Hardly anyone will see the benefits of such a change in the Bitcoin system, that suddenly, because somewhere a court order pops up from what kind of country or what kind of rogue court system in the middle of nowhere, a court order pops up and somebody claims Bitcoin, and if you happen to have that in your wallet because it's traced back to your wallet, they will pull it from your wallet. Yeah, that were actually my coins. And that is such a huge break of fungibility of money. I don't see that ever happen. And this judge actually is better aware of how Bitcoin works than Craig Wright ever will be.
I know, I love this. I love the fact that he's been banging on for ages about court orders forcing developers and forcing miners to do this. And she's just read it and gone, nah, no, it's not. It's so simple.
Nee, that's not going to happen, and it's not very likely. And that's why it ended up that she said, I do not approve this case based on the merits.
With the Mt. Gox rehabilitation team the only outfit that has the potential to mount a legal challenge to the BSV coins in the OneFeeks wallet, we'll have to wait and see if Wright's circuitous route to access them ends in success or failure. This month also brought mention from Wright of the Coinbase and Kraken lawsuits, which we covered in our May 2022 update. To date, all we have to go on for these is a press release from Wright's legal firm Ontier stating that Wright was filing charges against Kraken and Coinbase for passing off Bitcoin as BTC, when in fact it should go under the ticker BSV. We still haven't seen any actual filing related to this, which may be because it hasn't been made public, as things often aren't in British courts, but it may also be because Wright still hasn't actually filed anything yet. Nevertheless, he was on LinkedIn again this month, talking once again about the damage he was going to wreak on the crypto landscape. To all Coinbase and Kraken digital asset exchange customers, I'm giving you a final heads up. Legally, you have a debt like money in a bank. The digital assets on these exchanges are not yours. Rather, there is an obligation to repay that will not extend through bankruptcy. Later this month, you will understand if you have any money on these systems, it will end up divided between creditors, and I will control over 50% when this is finished. I don't want your money, I want the heads of those in charge, so to speak. But if you have money or assets on these bucket shops still by the end of the month, it will be liable to seizure. You don't believe me? I gave you a forewarning and you could ignore it, at your peril. Coinbase and Kraken will not exist after what is about to occur. I don't need to do this legally, I choose to. Now, we've heard this kind of talk before, most notably when Wright was promising to hunt every dev until they are broken, bankrupt and alone, and claiming that sending them all to prison for perjury would be boringly easy. However, after his abject failure in taking the developers to court, we can convincingly say that what was supposed to be boringly easy was, in fact, hilariously difficult. Wright clearly hasn't learned that his rhetoric is rarely met with the matching result, and yet here he is again, ramping it up and claiming that he is going to bring Coinbase and Kraken down by, checks calendar, today. Of course, Wright's certainty and his time-sensitive predictions are based on absolutely nothing. After all, it suggests that Coinbase and Kraken have told him weeks ahead of time that they will acquiesce to his demands at the first time of asking, but are just another way to sow a level of certainty and foreknowledge and therefore give him more credibility within the BSV camp. And of course, when they don't come true, they are never mentioned again. On the subject of lawsuits, Wright gave us a typically unhinged preview of what's to come for every single company in the crypto space, including Kraken and Coinbase. I suggest that those planning on doing something like this figure out that they might not have a company by the end of the year if they start integrating things like BTC and other things that I'm about to have a lot of lawsuits against. Some will be quicker than others. Smaller companies will end up bankrupt before others. Let's put it this way, if you like not being part of a lawsuit, if you like not being dragged through court, if you don't want to be part of all that shit, then don't go around promoting things like Solana and BTC. When I said I have a 2016 patent momentum going to enforce that patent, I don't care of you also to BSV. If you support ERC 721, if you support OpenSea, if you support Solana, you don't have an existence in the future. If you don't like that shit, stiff fucking shit. BTC Core and uses of BTC will end up in court this year. BCH will end up in court this year. Many of the exchanges will end up in court this year. Solana, Ethereum, and many others are going to end up in court because of paint violations. Look, we don't write it, okay? He says it, and then we have to bloody well talk about it.
Yeah.
Arthur, how do these unhinged rants compare to Satoshi's emails, blog posts, and so on?
Nou ja, stiff fucking shit. Yeah, that's something that I can hear Satoshi say.
Oh, certainly.
Oh my god, no. This is so much not Satoshi talking. And the first thing that comes to mind is that in 2016 somewhere, a professional company did a text analysis between Craig Wright's text and Satoshi's text. And it was a complete failure for Craig Wright. There was no match whatsoever between those two people talking online.
I don't know how he comes up with this stuff. I don't know how it comes out, but paint violations. I know he doesn't mean that, but it just reinforces the stupidity, doesn't it? Paint violations.
Yeah, what he claims sometimes is that he is using some speech software that will put his speech into writing online.
He must be.
But yeah, when he says paint violations, yeah, of course you see all kinds of jokes being made online already about that silliness. Of course he means patent violations.
I think we've mentioned this before, but he's in a very, very senior position, and yet they allow him to say all this stuff. If there's any other company that has aspirations like BSV does, Google or Microsoft or whatever it might be, could you even consider someone of such a position of power, one of their executive board, going onto social media and posting this rubbish? It just wouldn't happen, would it?
No. If you compare, for example, with Elon Musk, who is also known sometimes for his spicy and juicy things that he is saying online, yeah, he will be immediately corrected by other senior members of his companies, or he will be corrected by the shareholders. And then you can see that he will tune down a bit. And of course, Elon Musk will come up with new silliness every now and then. But Craig Wright is an endless stream of nonsense, false promises, crazy rants and stuff. And nobody is really stopping him.
And he is really one for talking about divisions in the crypto space, always complaining about the fact that there's all these warring factions, and especially if complaining that people hate BSV because they're so scared of it and this sort of thing. But if you go about threatening everyone and everything in the space, then what do you expect?
Yeah, but the crypto space is not divided so much in looking at him as being the crazy guy that he is. He can claim that he is important and that everybody is fearful of him. Well, no, everybody ignores him actually, and no, already based on one or two forgeries that they've seen and a few silly statements about SegWit flaws and things like that. Yeah, then they already know this guy is not serious. This is a scammer. Let's ignore him. And the only people that take him seriously is mostly in his own camp. So the division is mostly in his own camp that he is creating.
Yeah, I think so. On the subject of fear as well, you mentioned that, and that's something I was going to bring up as well. This, to my knowledge, is the first time he's mentioned Solana, which is, for those who don't know, is another smart contract blockchain platform. And like, you can say what you like about Solana and the rest of them, but at least they're seeing some kind of legitimate, or illegitimate, but they're seeing some kind of adoption in the space, unlike BSV, which is just flatlining. So do you think he's taking on these newer projects now because he's fearful of the competition they present to BSV?
Yeah, could be. I mean, I see Solana, for example, mentioned already for a few years that they think it's a competitor of BSV because they claim they can do transactions per second in the same sense as BSV is claiming they can do. So of course, Drake is probably fearful in a sense of that. On the other hand, Solana has crashed also in the last 7 months, 7 times, I think, or the last year or 1.5 years. But they had to halt their network and reboot it. Well, that is not a very stable environment. So, yeah, what to say?
Wright also took to LinkedIn this month to insult the world before potentially boring it to death. Seeing as people cannot understand basic English in the world anymore, I'm doing a long-term project to break down my white paper, literally, and I mean literally, line by line. I am going to point out the meaning of every word, every phrase, every term that I have used, and the meaning of the sentence at a level that normal people who have graduated from high school should be able to understand. Now, Arthur, I've done the maths on this, and here's how it breaks down, okay? Wright has penned 2 of these explainers now, both at least 2,600 words in length, covering the first 2 sentences of the white paper alone. Now, going by the first few pages, the average number of words per sentence in the white paper is around 35, and the word count is around 3,000 in total when you take out the formulas. So this means that Wright is going to offer explanations for at least 85 sentences, which at 2,600 words a sentence is a grand total of 221,000 words explaining his twisted version of the white paper. Now, if that sounds high enough already, let's put it into context. That's the same as reading The Hobbit twice, the first 2.5 Harry Potter books, or the first 11 books of the New Testament Bible, except that all of it is about Alice and fucking Bob. Now, this is clearly just Wright trying to prove that he knows more about Bitcoin than anyone else. But honestly, do you think anyone has the patience, let alone the desire, to sit through 2 Hobbits worth of Bitcoin white paper analysis from Craig Wright?
No, I don't think so. I mean, his videos about Bitcoin are already hardly watched and mostly debunked and taken for granted that this is again not Satoshi speaking. And yeah, I'm not going to take this very seriously, to be honest.
I mean, he started the first 2 sentences, and like I said, it's 2,600 words at least for both of them. I don't think even he's got the staying power for this, and even if he has, I just can't see how this is a decent use of his time. We get a finite amount of time on this planet, and he wants to waste so much with a line-by-line breakdown of the Bitcoin white paper. I mean, aside from him wanting to prove he knows all about it, is there any other reason you can see why he's doing it?
Yeah, he wants to be the expert on Bitcoin, and he wants to get his story out. But it is mostly because Calvin Ayre is probably asking it from him. And in his discussions with Calvin Ayre really wants to have him on the throne of Satoshi Nakamoto. This is one of the desperate attempts to try to do that.
Wright was spouting more gems on LinkedIn this month when he pondered why people don't try to prove him wrong anymore. You will notice that when I shoot down and destroy the fallacious arguments concerning Bitcoin, there are no real arguments presented by the other side. For instance, where I commented on the fact that Bitcoin is not the first decentralized cryptocurrency, that it is first of all not a cryptocurrency, and secondly, it is not the first decentralized peer-to-peer digital cash system, people don't come back and provide evidence that I'm wrong. There's a reason I've already discredited those claims, and there is no way for them to make counter-arguments. No, Craig, the reason there's no way for them to make counter-arguments is because you've shot off every single avenue of critical thought. For those who aren't aware, Wright's Twitter account is a broadcast-only sleep fest maintained by his minions and is nothing to do with him. His Slack group is full of paid-up sycophants who are harangued and then barred if they argue against him, and he judiciously blocks anyone on LinkedIn who questions his authority, as I myself know to my cost. The end result is a totally unsurprising lack of critical argument and an echo chamber full of yes men. Although, Arthur, it seems that we might no longer have the pleasure of Wright's LinkedIn rants, at least for a short while. Why is this?
Well, yeah, I noticed it too. It appears that Craig Wright has been kicked from LinkedIn today because his account is not accessible and his articles on LinkedIn are not accessible. Well, we can think two things. It happened before, what was it, 1-2 months ago, that he was, for a short while, he was kicked by LinkedIn from LinkedIn. And knowing LinkedIn, which works basically the same as Twitter, you get a first fair warning for misconduct, and you have to state that you will not do that same type of misconduct again. But if you do it again, then you will be kicked from the platform forever. And it is the same as how LinkedIn works. But it will probably mean that he now has his second suspension, which might be permanent. On the other hand, we also know that he has been claiming somewhere else, I think it was in Slack, that he would take a week off. Then you hibernate your LinkedIn account, and at the same time, if the platform offers it, then also your posts and your account is not visible for members and non-members who are browsing over the platform. Maybe you can do that on LinkedIn, I don't know. So that also might be the case based on that he said that he would take a week off on Slack.
Okay, so he might have just paused things on all fronts. What's the advantage of doing that? Why would he have done that? Because I would have thought he'd want people to see all his stuff for eternity. Wonder why he's done that.
Although we don't know the circumstances, how this happened, but I expect that it will be a perma-ban in the end, that he will be kicked forever now from LinkedIn.
Well, Wright was, as you say, booted from the platform in May because, according to him, LinkedIn said that his claims that BTC isn't Bitcoin were unprofessional and tantamount to harassing people, adding that LinkedIn said he could come back if he promised not to talk about Bitcoin, which he clearly hasn't done. No doubt, if he has been suspended, the BSV community will claim that the MasterCard mafia is involved in some way, but the truth is that Wright knew the rules LinkedIn had told him to follow and he didn't follow them. The end. And good riddance. We also got big news in the all-important COPA case this month, the one that everyone, especially Craig Wright, is looking forward to. The case that Wright said would be over in a few weeks, back in November last year, is scheduled for the first quarter of 2024, sometime between January and March, after COPA delayed the trial because it doesn't want to face Wright in court. Well, that is if you read CoinGeek. Arthur, what's the truth behind the delay?
Yeah, as far as I can judge it, based on the public information, there was not really a delay, and certainly not from the COPA side. What happened, the trial was estimated probably by COPA to last no less than 20 days, well, which is actually a pretty long trial if you think about it. So when COPA requested that the judge should make a schedule for when this trial could happen, then the judge has to look at his ongoing cases. When do we have a time frame of 20 days free for the COPA versus Wright case? Now, then he ends up deciding that it will only be available in the first quarter of 2024. That makes total sense. But the second reason might have been the fact that the court's deputy master, the case managing judge, so to say, pulled himself from the case, in this case on request of Koper's counsel. We can only guess the reason behind that, but fairly standard reasons are conflicts of interest between the judge and one of the parties. For example, when the judge in a previous job represented or advised the claimant or the defendant. But on the other hand, I don't see this as a firm reason for delaying things, but the new judge, the new deputy master, should of course read into the case, and that will take some time also, but not the time between now and the first quarter of 2024. I cannot imagine that this is really the case why it was scheduled in 2024.
Of course, this wasn't the story we got from CoinGeek and the rest of the BSV firmament. No, according to them, Koper was delaying a case they themselves filed 2 years ago because, said Calvin Ayre, they know they cannot win this case against Satoshi. Ayre added the same day to someone else that Koper cannot win and are doing all they can to delay this, and yet again saying every step is a delay on their side. As an aside on Calvin Ayre's Twitter activity this month, he is seemingly trying to make a new friend. Stephen Deal is a British computer programmer who has made a name for himself bashing cryptocurrencies, calling Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme and calling for a blanket ban on the entire sector. Over the weekend of July 9th and July 10th, Deal put out a series of typically anti-crypto tweets, around 10 in total within 24 hours, with Ayre replying to 5 of them and retweeting 1, 3 of which pointed to the same video about BSV and IPv6, and 1 of which pointed to a CoinGeek vomit fest regarding Wright's Bitcoin history, which we'll come to in a minute. The rationale behind this would seem to be that Deal only has such a bad opinion about crypto because he hasn't come across BSV yet, and if he would only take the time to learn about it, then he would be brought round, at least to BSV. This narrative, of course, fits with Craig Wright's recent claim that all cryptocurrencies except BSV are scams, and Ayre is obviously looking for further support from the anti-crypto brigade, not realising that once someone like Deal takes a look at the rapidly emptying bathtub that is BSV, it is not exactly going to end in a glowing review. Ironically, the tweet from Deal that Ayre retweeted saw Deal opine that cryptocurrencies are self-assembled Ponzi schemes simply reassembled in different forms and wrapped in a false veneer of technical legitimacy and phony populism to rationalise the scam. Never has there been a finer assessment of Calvin Ayre's pet project. Anyway, back to the Koper case. CoinGeek noted the recusal of the deputy master, but somehow didn't equate this to being a factor in the delay, noting that Koper's last-minute request for the deputy master to recuse himself is interesting, and said that it could be taken as a sign that the alliance has bitten off more than it can chew. No, it didn't want a potentially prejudiced individual being involved in the proceedings, a decision that's ultimately been proved correct. And let's not forget that part of the delay is down to Wright's legal team fighting to have the evidence from the Kleiman case banned from the trial, a fight they lost. CoinGeek added that the sudden unwillingness to meet Dr. Wright in court would be in keeping with the behaviour of his other legal adversaries, but it's particularly notable considering Koper was set up solely to wage this war on Dr. Wright. Here we go again. Regular listeners to the podcast will know that we've had cause to explode this myth that Wright's legal combatants don't want to meet him in court before, but for the sake of context, here's the highlights. Wright sued Adam Back and pulled out before it could get to court. Wright sued Vitalik Buterin but pulled out before it could get to court. Wright sued Roger Ver but lost on a jurisdictional basis before it could get to court. Wright attempted on multiple occasions to dismiss the Kleiman case before it went to court. Wright filed for a summary judgment against Peter McCormack before it could get to court, and the cabal of developers in the Pineapple Hack case were preparing to meet Wright in court when he lost a pre-trial hearing. And by the way, setting a court date with someone is the exact opposite of being unwilling to meet them in court. You don't set a wedding date and then immediately blame your fiancé for not being willing to meet you at the fucking altar. You've literally just agreed to do the thing you said you'd do. CoinGeek writer Jordan Adkins, who penned this nonsensical pile of horse shit, then went totally off the rails. It's the first significant development in the case since it was filed back in April 2021. The suit has been in a state of suspended animation as Dr. Wright works his way through separate legal battles, chalking up victories as he goes. Arthur, what victories are these then?
Oh my God. Of course, there was the Cobra Bitcoin case, which was a default judgment. And Wright set of default judgment in the Peter McCormack trial. I know how much, or rather how little, a default judgment is really worth. I am completing my PhD in law this year, and all I have to say is, I know how little a default judgment is worth. So, yeah, is this a win? I don't think so. I would even Craig Wright does not consider this as a real win. I mean, let's be honest. Then we have the Klimas versus Wright case. Well, he had to pay 143 million penalty, including post-judgment interest. And there is also a post-judgment interest ticker counting as long as Craig Wright doesn't pay, and he didn't pay a penny yet so far. So this is really not a win by any stretch. Peter McCormack is, the verdict is pending. We have seen the trial, but remember, Craig Wright pulled almost the entire argument weeks before the trial after claims were completely undermined by evidence of Peter's tweets being harmful in his efforts of obtaining speaking slots at conferences. You might remember that in that case, when we discussed it in a previous episode, that there were 10 conferences where he was kicked from based on Peter's tweet. It ended up that it was not based on Peter's tweets, but on his papers that he sent in to be judged by peer reviewers of the organization. So yeah, of course we have to wait for the verdict, but it's an ongoing case and cannot be considered a win at the moment. Now then we have COPA, of course, also an ongoing case. We know about the trial date, and we know about a lost motion to prevent climate evidence being used in trial. Well, then we have the pineapple hack case against the developers, which he lost. I mean, he did not win that at all. He's trying to appeal, but he lost. There are a few more cases that are not mentioned on CoinGeek, which is, for example, the HODLNOT case versus Wright in Norway. We are expecting the trial in September. Well, not mentioned. The other side of the story is that Wright is also suing HODLNOT in the UK, but it's also an ongoing case. And we, of course, know about the Wright versus Fur on Antigua, which is the second or third try for libel, I think, against Roger Ver. But it's also an ongoing case. Cannot be considered a win. You know, this guy on CoinGeek, he does not even mention this pineapple hack case. I mean, they just pick some things that they think is adding to their case, and by leaving out the things that would not add to the case, then they can make the point that Craig is probably winning. But if you look at the total list of cases, he's not winning anything.
Here's a little nugget from the COPA case that I didn't know about. Wright says that he destroyed the private key to block 9, the one he apparently used to sign blocks for Rory Kethlen-Jones and Ludwig Siegler in the signing sessions in 2016, which is why he can't use it to prove his ownership of it. This, of course, is a nice little way for him to keep up the pretense that the signing sessions were legitimate, but that, oh drat, he can't possibly replicate them because he's gone and thrown away the key. What a mistake, we'll just have to believe him. Arthur, Wright uses a computer file deletion and possibly hard disk destruction as the reason why he can't sign one of the blocks anymore, and we're just supposed to trust him that it was there. But isn't Wright's wife suing Ira Kleiman for doing something very similar?
Yeah, and I dived into that story. I mean, Tulip Trust suing Ira Kleiman because there's otherwise no other possibility to obtain the private keys, while in April 2016, Craig allegedly obtained the private keys for the signing proof sessions, but he couldn't have obtained them from David Kleiman at that moment, because he was dead, nor from Ira Kleiman, as he had deleted and reformatted all Dave devices by then. So there was this other trustee that was at that moment pushed forward in a forgery. I mean, which was Danish Mayaka, who we also know as the bonded courier in 2020 in January. It all doesn't fit. And to add some more juicy details to the story, Craig even discussed with Stephen Matthews and Robert McGregor in April 2016 that he knew at that very same moment that Dave Kleiman's keys were destroyed. So, did Craig not arrange for backups? Did he not advise the Tulip Trust, Danish Mayaka, to arrange proper backups? Or more urgently, is the Tulip Trust now falsely forwarding their lack of responsibility or ignoring their fiduciary duties to Ira Kleiman?
With the Copa case now allotted a firm date, the two opponents can start the laborious process of information gathering, although no doubt there will be a few little nuggets to be shared along the way. CoinGeek shared another nauseating trip down fake memory lane this month when it offered us How Bitcoin Was Saved, the most sycophantic and pandering piece of garbage that site has ever produced. The piece began in anticipated fashion, claiming that the Bitcoin core developers who took over from Satoshi Nakamoto ripped out its engine before throwing up this pile of word vomit. Bitcoin might have been permanently relegated to the role of financial buggy whip were it not for the timely intervention of Calvin Ayre and Stephen Matthews, who helped facilitate Satoshi's return in the form of Dr. Craig Wright and steered Bitcoin back onto its original revolutionary path. Now, we have no intention of putting you through any more of this arse-licking cringe fest than we absolutely have to, but there are some things we just can't ignore. First, there is the story of how Wright presented Matthews with an early version of the Bitcoin whitepaper in July or August 2008 on a USB stick. But Arthur, handily, there's no copy of this, is there, either on the USB stick or the hard drive it came from our world-famous IT specialist?
No. Calvin Ayre once claimed in a video interview that Stefan lost it. But on Twitter, Stefan said that he never lost anything. So that is contradictory. So it appears to me that Camp Craig Wright might have forged, in the meantime, some USB stick evidence recently, but didn't update Calvin Ayre about it yet. Well, I'm only guessing, of course, but don't get me wrong. But we will see in the HODL and in the COPA cases, is my guess that if anything of this is going to pop up, and if it does, if it is forensically inquired and found to be, as I firmly expect, a forgery.
And what about any other evidence of early white paper drafts? Do we know anything about those? Have we ever seen any?
Yeah, I did an article about which is called on my Medium page the Blacknet lie. And I post there, I have gathered several more forgeries that Craig created over the years to pretend that he wrote the white paper. It's not only the USB stick, we don't know anything about it, but other forgeries that he posted online, we can see they are all recent day forgeries where he replaced, for example, the Satoshi Nakamoto name with his own name, and he once even made a typo peer-to-ear in the title of one of them.
Peer-to-ear.
Crazy, yeah, it's crazy.
I love the fact that a typo brings him down. If there's anything that's going to bring him down, a simple typo would be just justice.
Yes, sir.
We also got a nice and fluffy story about how Calvin Ayre came on board in that infamous 2015 deal that bailed Wright out, handily not mentioning a certain document that was used as a form of collateral. Arthur, what is this all-important document and how did it come to factor in the Craig Wright Calvin Ayre story?
Yeah, you're probably referring to that one fix paper wallet that we found in the Kleiman versus Wright case. It was used as an exhibit. It happened in June 2015, and that was, as we all know, the bailout period where Craig was trying to get, I always round it to 15 million, but it has several components. But as an collateral to that 15 million, Calvin Ayre appreciated, something as a backup for that money that he was or his camp was going to spend on this bailout. So what did Craig Wright do? He had already since a few years, in 2013, he started to pick random rich list addresses from the Bitcoin address list. And he came up with the 1 fix. So at that moment he thought, well, I've used 1 fix before, I could use it again. It has not been debunked in a firm sense, and at least that had the debunks by ATO did not reach Kelvin Ayre at that moment. Now, so he created a forgery on a website with the 2015 artwork for another address. Then he replaced the other Bitcoin public address for the 1 fix address, not knowing, and this is just one of the things, I mean, there are several things wrong with that, but this was for me so perfectly clear that this is a forgery. The artwork of the paper wallet that you print is tailor-made for a specific address. So if you run the software from 2015 on the 1 fix address, a totally different artwork will be created by that website for that paper wallet. So many things were wrong with that paper wallet. It was a clear forgery. And knowing that he doesn't have the private key to that address anyway, he cannot do anything. It was clearly aimed to defraud Kelvin Ayre for 20 million.
CoinGeek also neglected to mention another crucial aspect of this deal. Wright needed to be publicly accepted as Satoshi Nakamoto for the plan to work, and would get $250,000 if this was achieved before 31st of December 2016. Amazingly, the entire proof session debacle, including Wright getting busted for using a public Satoshi signature and creating a fake news story on a fake news website to get out of sending coins from the original Satoshi wallets, is reduced by CoinGeek to a media blow-up, which is just about as big a whitewash of the entire thing as you could possibly get. The rest of the piece is just a dull as ditchwater explanation of the corporate entities that now back BSV and its miners. But Arthur, there are some truly special moments in the last couple of paragraphs. The small block developer cabal that hijacked the Bitcoin protocol a decade ago aimed to force users into proprietary sidechains by eliminating on-chain capacity. In this process, they also sought to neutralize the threat the original Bitcoin posed to the legacy financial giants that supported these developers. Their plot is now in tatters thanks to the timely intervention of a handful of individuals and their commitment to seeing Bitcoin fulfill its original vision. Arthur, I must have missed something here. Whose plot is in tatters?
Originally, Bitcoin was a threat to MasterCard, and now with BSV being the original Bitcoin, MasterCard is trembling and shaking again? I have no idea.
Strange thing. But also, looking at the piece as a whole, there's something quite important we learned about the author, isn't there?
The guy called Steven Stradbrook?
Yeah.
It appears that the CoinGeek profile photo of Steven Stradbrook is a stock photo of someone that can still be found online and was made in 2011 somewhere. And Kelvin Ayre appears to have been using that same stock photo in 2015 already. So yeah, that are clear hints that this Steven Stradbrook is not it's just a fake account that they used to put articles on.
Isn't that fantastic? They're so fraudulent, they're so fake, they don't even have real authors.
No, and there are more of them.
Well, this is the thing I was going to come on to next. There's also something suspicious to me about Jordan Adkins, who we've seen as another prolific CoinGeek liar. His author bio says that he has served as editor and contributed to a variety of publications in the business, legal and sporting spheres. And yet, apart from CoinGeek, I can see no other reference on the entire internet for him. As far as I can tell, he has no social media profiles and no profiles on websites for journalists. In fact, his only existence is as a CoinGeek writer. Now, of course, there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation for why he's not to be found anywhere. But for someone who looks to be going from their profile picture in their late 20s, early 30s, and says they've worked for a variety of publications, you would have thought that something would be online in this day and age regarding their previous work. But no, unless he's using a fake name elsewhere, I don't think Jordan Adkins exists either.
No, if you ask me, and I've seen that suspicion being spoken out by others also, that this Jordan Atkins guy is probably an alter ego of Kurt Workert Jr. And when somebody brought it up against Kurt Workert, he was immediately blocked, and he didn't want to talk about that subject.
Those who, like us, have been unfortunate enough to have a perverted desire to keep tabs on Craig Wright's doings will not have failed to notice that BSV and IPv6 has become his latest fascination, the way in which he thinks BSV can infiltrate the tech market. Don't worry, we're not going to go as boringly technical as Satoshi himself tends to do on these matters. No, what we're going to do instead is expose his complete misunderstanding, intentional or otherwise, of the history of Bitcoin and IPv6. Now, for our purposes, we don't actually need to go into what IPv6 is, but what we do need to know is that Wright has been trotting around the world in 2022, holding seminars on the subject and lying about it. In fact, CoinGeek's piece of Bitcoin fiction touched on this. Wright continues to file more patents and is now a global keynote speaker on the IEEE conference series alongside Professor Latif Ladid, explaining how original Bitcoin was always designed to integrate with IPv6 and enable the next generation of data valuation over the internet. Only those supporting rival technologies or with axes to grind refuse to accept Dr. Wright as the sole inventor of Bitcoin. Now, here's Wright talking about Bitcoin and IPv6 in March this year during a conference in Dubai.
Bitcoin actually was IPv6 enabled in the first version of Bitcoin back in 2009. People don't realize that. It was turned off after I stopped being part of the development team.
Arthur, how true is this?
This is a complete rewrite of history. In 2009, in the first release, in January 2009, there was no support for IPv6. And in 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto himself noted down in the Bitcoin code, in the comments, he literally said, ignore IPv6 for now, since it isn't implemented anyway. So yeah, and then when you look at the history, when Bitcoin became IPv6 compatible, it was only much later, in 2012, when Bitcoin developer Peter Wuille added the actual IPv6 support in the Bitcoin code.
Now, here's Wright discussing IPv6 with someone just this month, and he lets slip another piece of Bitcoin history.
When I first released Bitcoin, ironically, IPv6 was part of the protocol.
Really?
It got pulled out, and I listened to people like Eric Voorhees who told me no one can manage it, so it's a security concern at the moment, blah, blah, blah. Because, well, I was silly enough not to think that these guys had a different agenda to me.
So, Arthur, is this true? Did Eric Voorhees tell Craig Wright to take out IPv6?
Yeah, this is slightly more complicated, so let me try to recap this for a bit more.
Okay.
Craig Wright says that when he released Bitcoin in January 2009, he had talked to Eric Voorhees, which must have happened late 2008 then, who convinced him that he should remove IPv6 support because of security concerns. Because in reality, and despite Craig Wright's lies that there was actually IPv6 support in Bitcoin, there was factually no IPv6 support in Bitcoin in the January 8, 2009 release already. So this is a wonderful rewrite of Bitcoin history again, because Eric Voorhees, who isn't even a coder or anything, only discovered Bitcoin in May 2011, as he admitted in an interview with Bitcoin Magazine in July 2013. But let me quote. Bitcoin Magazine asked him, you discovered Bitcoin in May 2011? How? Where? And then Eric Voorhees said, yeah, it was fairly innocuous, but had profound consequences. I was cruising Facebook and saw a friend's post that mentioned some weird currency that had appreciated by a gazillion % since the prior October. And I clicked the link, I read about this thing called Bitcoin and dismissed it outright as preposterous. Fake internet money didn't appeal to me. Then I read more and more, and I found an elegant answer to each skeptical question that popped up in my mind. After a couple of hours, I was utterly hooked, and I realized it would change the world, and I better figure out what the hell it's all about. That day was one of the most important days of my life. It was like discovering some great truth, like seeing the future. I quit everything I was doing and I jumped down the rabbit hole. Now, why is this quote so important, Mark? He clearly remembers when he discovered Bitcoin. It was May 2011. Mm-hmm. So if we try to mix this back again in Craig's nonsense, this conversation between Craig Wright and Eric Voorhees could not have happened before May 2011. And then again, it makes no total sense in the whole time frame of when the actual support for IPv6 was added and removed. So yeah, it's such a nonsense what Craig is saying here.
And also, I love how the people interviewing him just swallow everything he says. He just makes up these conversations that never happened, obviously. They're like 3 years out of date. And they're like, oh, really?
Oh, yeah. But Mark, that is how a con man works. It's a confidence game. He makes it up on the spot. He thinks like, oh, let's mention one of the Bitcoin OGs, Eric Voorhees. I talked to Eric Voorhees. So he is trying to impress with the name Eric Voorhees that he is close to him. Mm-hmm. But for the casual listener, it will be impressive. But for the more critical listeners as we are, it's becoming such a hilarious nonsense because it totally makes no sense when you really know what happened in the Bitcoin history.
On the subject of Wright not knowing what's in the Bitcoin white paper, Twitter user and fellow Craig Wright debunker Tak Horikoshi put together a beautiful montage of Craig Wright changing his mind on what peer-to-peer means. Here's a quick excerpt from that montage.
Users exchanging with users are not truly peer-to-peer. The miners, the nodes, they're peer-to-peer.
So the peer-to-peer in this case, it's referring. Is it referring to the nodes or to the users? Then you're saying it's referring to the nodes.
Correct.
Peer-to-peer. Very simple concept. Alice goes to Bob, exchanges a transaction, does a negotiation. Think about it for a moment.
But you're saying peer-to-peer really primarily refers to the nodes, not to the users.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, Arthur, what does the Bitcoin white paper actually say about peer-to-peer?
Then you only have to look at the first line of the Bitcoin white paper because that is already pretty clear what Satoshi means with peer-to-peer. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. Now, of course, one could argue here that there's still a miner between these two parties to settle and finalize these transactions when looking at the on-chain payments. And while, for example, payments with Bitcoin on the Lightning Network do not have that step included with a miner. But let's not forget, a miner is still not a financial institution because under normal circumstances, a miner does not take custody of Bitcoin funds. And a miner is also not able to keep or reject the transaction and transfer it back to the person who sent it. So Satoshi clearly means peer-to-peer as in person-to-person here. And not peer as in a Bitcoin node. How Craig can come up with that, I have no idea.
At this point, I'll defer to our N-Chain insider, who told us a few weeks ago regarding Wright's attempts to integrate IPv6 into Bitcoin. If one day Craig starts producing highly cited IEEE papers and gains credibility among comp sci academics or work product of any real value, I'll be the first to admit I'm wrong. Until then, this is nothing more than useless technobabble designed to impress a small group of followers who find this kind of thing interesting. Amen. As part of the Craig Wright 2022 tour, our hero went to Saudi Arabia for the BSV Global Blockchain Convention, where he expanded on his plans to run other blockchains on BSV, which basically involves forcing them to join through legal action.
We can actually integrate this in ourselves and help people on board. So that's my offer at the moment. I mean, this is the carrot and the stick. So the hard way, easy way, I don't care. It's going to happen. There's no one I know of who isn't breaking an end-chain patent at the moment in this industry. And I can't go after everyone at once. I mean, we can do one or two a year, and we'll start with the big ones. So the small ones might survive a little while. But I might randomly pick a small one to pick on. And it would be much easier. I mean, I've said I've studied history in Temujin and things like this, and I believe in his strategy. And he used to go up to cities and basically come up with you can join me or not. And those who joined him became part of the empire. It was peaceful, they grew, it was wonderful. It was different for those who didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it is. It's such an opportunity, and I think we really should celebrate it, because I think this is a collaborative way to change things.
Arthur, this is fantastic. Wright has spent about a minute here saying how he's going to intentionally sue other blockchains either into oblivion or until they join BSV. And then Vuckert Jr. tries to claim it's all a collaboration. I mean, it reminds me of how Poland collaborated with the Nazis in 1939.
Yeah. You can even see in this little clip that Kurt Vuckert is almost shocked to hear those things.
He is.
But he quickly grabs himself by the shoulders and he desperately is trying to make the best of it. But yeah, it's quite shocking to hear those things, of course, from Craig Wright. This is certainly not collaboration. This is just forcing people into his. The Dutch word is gareel, but I don't know what is the English word for it.
Oh, absolute crock of shit is what you mean. It's worth talking for a moment about the Temujin that Wright mentions here, who the rest of us know as Genghis Khan. Wright has compared himself to Khan several times in the past, using the notion that he is a latter-day incarnation of the much-feared Mongol leader, professing his desire to raze to the ground any cryptocurrency project that doesn't bend to his will. Where Khan used military force to take what he wanted, Wright is going to use the patent courts to try and legally reinforce his to-date baseless claims that I created patents on every innovation in this field. This isn't the only similarity, as Khan had many admirers, including Italian explorer Marco Polo, who called Khan a man of great worth and of great ability and valour, and Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote this about Khan. The noble king was called Genghis Khan, who in his time was of so great renown, that there was nowhere in no region so excellent a lord in all things. Sounds eerily similar to a CoinGeek post. However, there were also those who saw another side of Khan as the man whose conquests and leadership caused widespread devastation and mass murder, and who enslaved or slaughtered anyone who refused to surrender to him. One theory as to how Genghis Khan died is after falling from his horse, his high horse from which he looked down on everybody else. It's clear that Wright is indeed taking the Genghis Khan route to adoption of BSV, force people to join whether they like it or not. Whether the BSV community chooses to see it this way or they whitewash it under the banner of collaboration, it's pretty clear that Jimmy Wynn's plea to build bridges rather than walls is being steadfastly ignored, and explains why he's leaving the project. Arthur, when it comes to Bitcoin and Satoshi, I don't recall any posts or emails or anything where he was talking about forcing people to use it. Do you recall anything like this?
No, on the contrary, he was more in favor of a more organic way of adoption. And instead, he is even more careful in his adoption approach. Because remember, where Craig is saying that he is going to force everybody, we know that Satoshi is known to have said, it would have been nice to get his attention in any other context. WikiLeaks has kicked the hornet's nest and the swarm is headed towards us. Now, and I read that as maybe Bitcoin was at that moment not ready yet to go mainstream, in the sense that a WikiLeaks supporter who then start sending donations to WikiLeaks.
Wright also signed off with some words of wisdom.
Craig, any closing big thoughts as we wrap up here?
Yes, I'd like people to start thinking about what they can build, not to make themselves rich instantly, but to make something worthwhile and lasting. Now, it might sound great. You get rich and have some silly asset that is worth money to someone for some reason that won't be around in 10 years.
Yeah.
But how about you build something that when you have grandchildren, they'll be proud that you were involved with? I mean, isn't that much better?
Jesus Christ. You mean proud like defrauding the ATO for tens of millions of dollars? You mean proud like hiding in a toilet and then running down the service stairs to get away from the police? You mean proud like blaming other people for outing you when your evidence is found to be fraudulent? You mean proud like threatening to kick people out of a chat room because they threaten your total authority? You mean proud like roping your wife, ex-wife, and multiple deceased people into your massive fraud? You mean proud like boasting to the people of Rwanda that you have more money than their country? You mean proud like stealing $57 million worth of assets from a company you and your dead best friend operated using fake contracts and signatures? Or you mean proud like threatening to personally hunt every dev until they're broke, bankrupt, and alone before losing their related court case? What a legacy for his grandchildren, eh, Arthur?
Yeah, if you look at it from this angle, it's amazing. It's crazy. This would not be a legacy that I would be proud of to leave behind. And in fact, I'm glad that I'm on the other side of the equation in this case. I try to map out as much as possible of the fraud that this guy is doing. I'm bringing it all online, and for people neutral or on any side of this discussion, to check for yourself who this guy really is. But in this summary, this highlights for me why I'm not a fan.
To say the very least, yes. I think there are some things he's done that are very, very questionable in terms of morals, and certainly something I wouldn't want my grandkids to realise that I'd done. So yeah, agreed on that point. Well, we'll leave on that note. Arthur, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you for joining me.
As usual, a pleasure again, and see you next month.
Yes, see you next month for our next update.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. If you enjoyed what you heard, we'd love it if you could rate and even review us on your podcast app of choice to help us spread the word. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast too in order to get the episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You've been listening to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. Written by Mark Hunter, with additional material by Arthur Van Pelt, editing and production by Mark Hunter. This has been a Contented Media production.